I recently wrote a column for the Washington Times on what I argued was the UN's long war against Israel. A war fought not with missiles, bullets, and bombs, but by propagandists, firing salvos of slander and disinformation. This war began no less than half a century ago. Back in 1975, the UN General Assembly, steered by the Soviet Union, adopted a resolution calling Zionism a form of racism. This was nonsense, because to be a Zionist only means you support Israel's right not to be annihilated, and the right of Israelis not to be exterminated. That Zionism and racism have nothing to do with one another was clear to Daniel Patrick Moynihan, in 1975 the U.S. ambassador to the UN, who called this UN resolution a lie. Among the slanders against Israel that have followed, that Israel is an apartheid state, despite the fact that Arab citizens in Israel enjoy rights denied Arab citizens of Arab countries. That Israel is committing genocide in Gaza, despite the fact that the population of Gaza is tenfold what it was in 1948. That Israel is using famine as a weapon of war, despite the fact that no nation in history has ever supplied so much food to an enemy population in wartime as Israel has and is right at this moment. FDD's Rich Goldberg has been studying the big lies about Israel and the big role the UN plays in spreading them. Rich is with us today to discuss the UN, its relationship with Hamas, and related issues. I'm Cliff May, and I'm pleased you could be with us too, here on Foreign Podicy. Well, good to see you, Rich, as always.
You too. Great to be back.
Listen, credit where credit is due. After I wrote that column, you were on Dan Senor's Call Me Back podcast. And this commercial, no need to pay for it. That's an invaluable podcast for anyone concerned about Israel. And you talked about the UN with emphasis on the UN Relief and Works Agency, or UNRWA, and its partnership with Hamas. And I got to say, I learned a lot, because until then, I guess I thought UNRWA had been intimidated by Hamas and was maybe complicit with Hamas. You made clear how much further it goes than that. Explain that to those who who didn't hear that podcast, or even those who did, who could use a little repetition.
Yeah, I think it's important to reflect that we're now 20 years on from the Israeli unilateral decision to leave the Gaza Strip, which means most of the major Israeli economy integration into the Strip, to the extent that was the case pre-2005, went away. There are ebbs and flows of attempts of relinking some sort of commerce, but certainly once the Gaza Strip got taken control by Hamas in 2007, that was done. This is a terror-controlled area. The Hamas is in control of the government, which means every aspect of the economy is terror-controlled. And Europe, the United States, not just Israel, made a decision to say, what are we supposed to do here? The terrorists are in charge. You can't be emboldening, you can't be enriching a terrorist government. And so where did Hamas go for its business model? Where did Gaza go for a business model? It went to the United Nations. And the United Nations is the economy, is the business model of the Gaza Strip. Therefore, when you think about all the aid organizations coordinated for all these years by UNRWA, as the organization that the UN says must be in the lead of all aid coordination in Palestinian territories where there are quote-unquote refugees that are there waiting to kick the Jews into the sea one day and go back to their homes pre-1948, supposedly. This organization coordinating with the WHO, the World Health Organization, or with World Food Program, WFP, or with the International Red Cross, or UNICEF, or you go down the alphabet soup of UN organizations. They're going to flood the Strip with money. They're going to flood the Strip with goods. They're going to run schools that are internationally funded. They're going to run civil society that's internationally funded. And you remove the responsibility of Hamas to do any of that work, any of that budget support. So they raise taxes still. They run all kinds of schemes that even use the international assistance that comes into the Strip, and then basically seize some of that and then resell it at higher prices to make a profit. do all that to stay in control, to be powerful, to import weapons from their sponsors, and to focus on the security control of the Strip and building out its security forces. And so October 7th doesn't happen without a successful UN Hamas business model over close to 20 years. That is key to understand, and to understand that inside the UN bureaucracy, which is already intrinsically, inherently hostile to Israel, has been for many, many years. Pretty obvious to most people who watch the UN for many years, but maybe not obvious to everyone. You have an additional problem on your hands because Hamas is not a terrorist organization according to the United Nations. They're a political organization. And I remember having these fights when I was still on Capitol Hill as a staffer, doing oversight of our UN programs. And I would sit across from one of the top officials of UNRWA, who was so upset that we were accusing the agency of terror finance and cooperation. And we said, but do you have Hamas people on the payroll? Are you paying benefits to Hamas people? He said, we do not have a political litmus test in the United Nations. We are neutral. Neutrality is our doctrine. You hear that a lot lately, don't you? Neutrality. Neutrality means we don't think Hamas are the bad guys. They're not a terrorist organization. They're not on the UN sanctions list. We can work with them. We have to work with them. And quite frankly, we kind of agree with them and like them. And so they keep that part quiet usually, unless they're tweeting post-October 7th. Yeah.
I mean, in a way, you could justify that pre-October 7th in the sense that you could say, look, the Israelis know that Qatar is sending a lot of money there. That money is being used to build things. Surely Qatar doesn't want to see it rubbled. The conceptia in Israel was maybe we can keep them sort of fat and happy. The Hamas keeps telling us we're very pleased that we have Gazans going to Israel to earn better salaries than they could earn here. We'd like to increase that. Would you be willing? The Israelis say yes. All that was so you could say, okay, they're terrorists in terms of the ideology, in terms of the charter, which says Israel will exist until Islam obliterates it. But maybe they're contained. Maybe they're tamed. But then you have the October pogrom, the invasion and pogrom. At that point, it's very clear that no, they haven't been tamed, nothing like it. And I would expect, Secretary General Antonio Guterres to say, oh, we have a problem here, don't we? Because UNRWA has always hired whoever Hamas said they should hire. UNRWA is very much hand in glove in a partnership. We do have a problem here. And instead they said, no, we don't have a problem here. We're sticking to our story. This is our partner. And what you have now in terms of, and you had for some time, is you had, for example, UNRWA saying, we deliver the food aid. We can talk about what this is for people who don't know, the Gaza Health Ministry, but it's a U.S.-Israel foundation delivering food that shouldn't go through Hamas so they can take whatever they want.
Gaza Humanitarian Foundation.
I'm sorry,
the Health Ministry, a very different.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Gaza Health Ministry. Yeah, right. Yes. Gaza Humanitarian Foundation.
Yes, I know what you meant.
And then no, but just get it right, because these terms are purposefully difficult. Anyhow, and then you have UNRWA saying, well, we want any trucks that come in for us to distribute aid. We want, Gaza police to accompany those to protect them. But the Gaza police is Hamas, of course.
Yeah, who's the Gaza police? Come on. Yeah.
But that's what they say. It's called the blue police.
I know.
People don't know
those people on the videos who were on top of the trucks. That was just local police securing the convoy. I know.
That's right.
I know. Yeah.
And the police need to have a sandwich occasionally too.
Yeah, it's actually just part of Hamas. Yes, of course.
It's a part of Hamas, and so the UN is totally now. Also part of the problem is
that was the early part of the war. To be fair, that was still before the transition to say, "Wow, to your point."
Yeah,
I think you've made an interesting counter argument. It's probably the strongest one that is out there, which is to say, maybe not me, maybe not you. But there were certainly, and bipartisan, and in parts of the Israeli government and different people at different times for different reasons, a sense of, I don't know what to do anymore with Gaza. It hasn't improved. It's not going away. We can't let there be a humanitarian disaster. We can't fund it. So we'll just put our money into the UN, and this UN business model will be the way we keep an arm's length and try not to have a problem and just keep the status quo going until we can figure out what else to do. I think that is a credible argument to make. Plenty of people said this is crazy, can't do it, stop funding Hamas, all that. Definitely people who were for it. And let's also be pretty open. We had a big problem where the IDF itself, the Israeli Defense Forces, were one of UNRWA's biggest defenders for years. You couldn't criticize UNRWA. You couldn't look to try to dismantle UNRWA. The same people who are now, the same branch of the military, not the same people, the same branch of the IDF that's in charge of coordinating all the humanitarian aids in Gaza and had been for years working with UNRWA, again said, well, what's the alternative right now? You defund UNRWA, you get rid of UNRWA, there's going to be no food aid, there's going to be there'd be humanitarian catastrophe. We can't let that happen. Then it's going to be Israel's problem. So the IDF itself would push back on Americans who were pushing for reform of UNRWA. Among me, one of them for many years. I know it. That all changed on October 7th, to your point. And so, okay, you got it wrong on the Qataris up until now. You got it wrong on the UN up until now. Okay, I don't want to live in the past. I want to move forward. I want to make sure we don't have another October 7th. I want to make sure Gaza is terror radical free. I want to make sure that we can actually move into an era of peace, security, normalization, integration across the region. It cannot happen by continuing a Hamas UN business model in Gaza. And so you're at this decision point. At first in the war, who else is going to be bringing in the aid and working in Gaza to try to distribute aid while you're at war? It's going to be the Hamas UN business model. And the minute the Israelis started figuring out, my God, we are being undermined in this war by the United Nations in bed with Hamas in how aid gets delivered, and that Hamas gets to control the aid when the UN's in charge of the delivery because they're in partnership with Hamas for 20 years, then we're never going to win. We're never going to clear. We're never going to get governance. Nobody's ever going to stand up and say we're ready to take control over Hamas. And so they finally declared UNRWA to be a terrorist organization, which it is, moved it to the side, made it persona non grata in Gaza, at least, still operates elsewhere. And by the way, if you look under the hood in the West Bank, Judea and Samaria, or you look under the hood in Lebanon or elsewhere where it operates, you'll find a lot of terrorism. You'll find a lot of terrorists. You'll find the same business model. This is a broken organization outside of Gaza as well. But what happened was the minute the Israelis said, we got to break this model, we got to do something else, UNRWA is the problem, the United Nations stood up and said, hell no, we're not going to let you do that. The Secretary General ordered the heads of all the major UN humanitarian organizations to issue a joint statement saying they will not do anything to prevent the ability of UNRWA to come back, to do its job, to be in existence. They will not be party to removing the essentialness, in their view, of UNRWA to the Palestinian people. So what does that mean? It means they would rather either not get food to people or make sure Hamas stays in power just to keep UNRWA in power because of the ideological commitment of UNRWA itself as the refugee population of Palestinians that is awaiting their right of return to go destroy Israel and carry out the logical end, which is October 7th on steroids. And so this is so twisted. It's so twisted. Financial conflicts, political and ideological conflicts, all at odds with the United States of America, its largest funder, not just the United Nations itself, but to those organizations on the ground right now pledging allegiance to UNRWA, pledging to sabotage any alternative means of delivering aid that would free up the population from extortion and duress from Hamas through the existing business model, and saying no, we're going to try to fight for UNRWA over what will be better for the long-term stability, peace, destruction of a terrorist organization, etc. So that is actually the background for everything you see. And so the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation being set up earlier this year, opening up its facilities in May, and having facilities mostly in the south, one in the central Gaza, mostly in the south, and actually dislodging that UN business model to show that there is a different way to do things that doesn't hand over control of aid to Hamas and can actually provide the civil solutions that we've been missing throughout this war, combined with military solutions to military problems. We see the UN going into full disinformation mode to protect the business model alongside the Hamas disinformation machine as well. Lying about the number of trucks that go into Gaza, right? Putting in their reports and their data for the media a number significantly lower than actual truck numbers because they don't want to account for non-UN trucks, non-UN aid.
They make believe they don't exist. They don't count those trucks.
Yeah. It's 2.5 times the actual number what they report of food that is going into Gaza, of trucks are going to Gaza. They say, oh, the Israelis, their customs and their security checks, they're not allowing trucks in. There's lines of trucks that are not allowed in. And they had to put a drone up. The Israelis had to put a drone up to go over a parking lot inside Gaza of all of the UN's trucks that are just sitting there with food rotting, refusing to actually deliver aid because they want to sabotage and make the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation look like it's failing and that people don't have food in Gaza. That starts unraveling. They leaked out a report that was supposedly, USAID, the U.S. Agency for International Development's Inspector General had supposedly done an investigation to look at these claims that Hamas diverts aid. And allegedly, according to Reuters and CNN, several weeks ago, you can look up the story, it turns out, according to their reports, senior officials had been briefed that investigators concluded that Hamas does not divert aid. In fact, this has been a lie by the Israelis. It's part of the Israeli propaganda campaign to deny food to the Palestinians. Well, guess what we found out? We found out that, in fact, that was a complete fabrication of a story. That the Inspector General's report didn't say that at all. That they simply couldn't find the actual proof of every incident where Hamas diverts the aid. They didn't say Hamas doesn't divert the aid. They said, we haven't been able to find you all the cases where Hamas diverts the aid.
Absence of evidence is not evidence of absence, right?
Correct. And so they ran with that story. Another key disinformation tactic. None of this, it takes a while, right? You see a story in the news. So then they start running pictures of babies that are emaciated and look horrifying. Look like they came out of the Holocaust, or out of Darfur. And in my view, they wanted to make Gaza Darfur. That's the model, right? This is save Gaza like we saved Darfur. And there is a genocide being committed. There is a starvation campaign being committed. There's a famine going on that the Israelis are imposing upon the people of Gaza. We must stop this horror. And eventually, great reporting by the Free Press unravels these pictures and starts looking at pictures that are being reused and reused.
And these pictures, let's be clear, we're talking about pictures of babies with congenital diseases who are not famine victims. And in fact, on the New York Times, among others, if you didn't crop the pictures, you would see the brother who is well fed behind the mother.
Correct. And again, they're heartbreaking photos.
Yeah.
And I'm not gonna sit here and deny that those who are suffering from underlying conditions are going to be at the front of the line for problems of malnourishment. Totally true.
Yeah.
Totally true. But to make a public perception that every child in Gaza looks like this child, that this is systemic, it's massive, it's everywhere, is not supported by any statistics, by any facts, and by any eyewitnesses who have been there and looked around and watched. It doesn't, as you say, be supported by some of the own photos when you remove the cropping. And so that was another tactic that was exposed. And then finally, as they started to lose the ability to say, what they really, I think, wanted to do was say there's starvation going on. right? That you heard that word a lot. There's starvation
Oh
in
yeah,
Gaza.
yeah. And it's
This
still
is a
being
word.
said. You have that manufacturer of soaps, Lush,
Oh yeah.
in today, I think, in Britain, saying Gaza is starving, we're closing, and with the implication that the Israelis are starving Gazans.
Right. But the Israelis then started putting out all the statistics. And by the way, no credit to the Israelis in the handling of communications in aspects over the last several months. Certainly much to be desired. 8,000 trucks carrying food entering Gaza since May. 2,300 pallets dropped from the air. No, the UN truck data is false. It's 2.5 times higher. We can prove it. No, whoever said the prices are spiking in markets is false. We've done the survey. Here's actually the prices today of all of these staple goods, right? It took them a long time to figure out to actually put facts out. But once the facts came out, it started undermining the starvation narrative entirely. There was no proof of it. In fact, there's quite proof of the opposite, that this is the most insane war ever conducted, where you do everything possible to feed the enemy the entire war and to keep your enemy in control of food. And so, obviously as an aside, Cliff, but I don't know how this country won World War II. This country today does not win World War II. I think that's an obvious fact. In our social media environment, in our politics, in just not even understanding what warfare is, in understanding how the rules of war actually are applied, winning and losing, the costs of winning and losing to your way of life.
Except I'm not sure this paradigm applies to anybody anywhere in the world ever except to Israel. And I think there's a reason for that is fairly self-evident.
I agree with you.
Okay?
I agree with you.
Because
like anybody cares right now. Like there's any front page stories, like there's any obsession, any news coverage on any podcasts, any Tucker Carlson episodes about the plight of the people in Sudan today. I mean, the famine conditions there, using all the correct gold standard statistics of that same IPC that manipulated its data
and just say
for Israel, it shows just horrific conditions in Sudan. The people who I know who have been to both Sudan and to Gaza say you can't even compare the two situations. And the fatality rates, the mortality rates in Sudan compared to the relatively low mortality rates in the Gaza Strip. I mean, it's two different worlds. Like it's actually Save Sudan time. It should be, but nobody wants to talk about that. They only want to have some little friend of yours from Gaza on your children's show with Miss Rachel and feature that. I mean, I'd love to see the Sudanese child on Miss Rachel.
Well, if you can't blame Israelis or Jews for the famine in Sudan, why would it be of any interest to the major media or to the UN? That just goes without saying. You mentioned IPC. I think you just need to explain for a second what that is.
Sorry.
That's okay, and its relation to the UN. And go ahead, explain just for a second, because this contributed to it, and it's the way the UN has contributed to this big lie.
We talk about the IPC like it's an organization. It is kind of an organization. It's a group, but it's a classification tool. There's a consortium, a group of both UN organizations and NGOs that sit together, and they review data, and they have an expert committee. They rely a lot on local experts and data collection, and then they have a small group that's supposed to go through it all, write up a report, and use specific classification criteria to determine what is going on as far as food insecurity in a certain area. And so it stands for Integrated Food Security Phase Classification, acronym IPC. It's a classification tool. And what is famine, according to this classification tool? What is the threshold to declare a famine somewhere? 3 key metrics. Number 1, at least 20% of households are facing an extreme lack of food. At least 30% of children, this is number 2, at least 30% of children are suffering from acute malnutrition. This is 30% metric. It's to be established through a measurement called height by weight. It's a Z-score. If anybody's taking your kids to the doctor and gotten a Z-score for them, it's a height by weight Z-score, which is measured exactly as you would think it is, height by weight. And this is said to be, in their own manual, the most reliable, error-free method of measurement. It's the one that should be relied upon for a famine declaration. There are other methods. They are used in very careful ways. They can sometimes be easier to take. in different environments. It's been pushed over the last 6 years or so, called a MUAC score. This is the middle upper arm circumference, which is basically a tape measure that goes around and can, based on what the circumference of the upper arm of a child is, give you some sort of indicator potentially of their malnutrition. It's not as reliable a statistic as height by weight. It is authorized for measurement across conflict zones. It is used in establishing various metrics, all the way up to famine likely. And in very rare cases where they simply can't get the height by weight measures for certain reasons, if they really think they have a very good collection sample of these MUAC scores, and they nuance their writing very carefully of what they're relying on, what they're not relying on. In certain cases in Sudan, they've also referenced it in a famine declaration. And so that's the second key classification tool. And then the third one is mortality rates. And that is very important. For every 10,000 people in a general population area, at least 2 of them need to be dying every day from malnutrition. Let me say that again. At least 2 out of 10,000 people. So, in a population like Gaza City, that had been at some point, let's say 1 million, right? You would need to be thinking about 200 or so people dying a day just in Gaza City from malnutrition. Okay? You have to have that statistical analysis, that reporting. Or if you're just looking at kids' populations, 4 kids under the age of 5 for every 10,000. It's a different type of metric pool for various reasons, but that would be another metric. What did the IPC report on Gaza when they declared their famine? We said there's an extreme lack of food, total disregard for all the statistics that the Israelis put out, total disregard for the price proof that the Israelis put out about the markets, with claiming all kinds of inaccessibility and spikes in prices, and even if it's accessible, it's not affordable. Ignored all of the actual evidence that the Israelis put forward, and they said, we believe, based on all these different estimates, at least 20% of the population, at least 20% of households are facing an extreme lack of food. Okay. I don't see the proof of that. We can. By the way, I hate this conversation in general for some reasons, because, we shouldn't be in the business of saying, well, how much are people hungry? Well, maybe people are a little hungry, or in these pockets they're really hungry, but in those pockets they're not hungry. It's a war. Okay, there are areas that are under fighting. This is, by the way, a very peculiar war, where you're not allowed to leave the war. You are not allowed, according to the United Nations and the international community, to leave the war. You have to stay there in harm's way, even though you might be able to relocate into the 22 Arab countries and more Muslim countries around the world.
Egypt, which is right next door. Right next door with the Sinai Desert. I mean, plenty of room.
Right. Not like a big open desert that could take 2 million people overnight. Right. Just doesn't exist right there. Right. No, you have to stay right in the middle of the fighting, where the IDF needs to go and where Hamas is hiding out and keeping hostages. That's where you got to stay there, and where we would need to get the convoys of aid to. Okay. So put all that aside. Of course, you're going to have pockets of issues here and there. Nobody's denying that. I've talked to very credible people who have worked from Bosnia to Sudan to Gaza, and they say, I see no evidence of starvation, certainly. I see no evidence of famine. I see evidence in pockets of people who could use more food, like a rations type environment. But that is what the evidence. Now, it's not a good thing if that's what we want to focus on, and that's your metric of success or failure. Like, yeah, okay, struggle with that, do more, figure out different. But also remember, the reason why maybe there's a pocket that's not getting as much food as it could might be because of the UN-Hamas business model, which we can talk about more. But let's keep going here, because it was so important to the UN to the detractors of Israel, to Hamas, to get to the famine declaration, to say there is a famine. It's not good enough for them to say people need more food. People could use more food. This area is doing well. This area is not doing well. They needed to race to a declaration of famine as soon as possible. Oh, and by the way, where did they need to declare it first? In the exact city where the IDF had announced they were about to go in for a major campaign, perhaps the last stand of Hamas, Gaza City.
Just
okay, let's go back.
I'm sure.
Let's go back. Well, let's go back to how they got there quickly. For all of their reports from Gaza that come out regularly, they had always said the standard for them in Gaza to declare a famine was that 30% of children using height by weight Z-score. They clearly had no way of achieving that metric, even in any convoluted estimation, statistical analysis, etc. All of their collection points, by the way, for data are the Hamas-run hospitals, that the Gaza Health Ministry, maybe even an NGO that is aligned with PFLP and Hamas terrorist organizations. They could not come up with a way to even squeak through in their own minds, where they already had a conclusion how to get there. So they put an asterisk in their late July report where they said, or if we find 15% of the children have a certain MUAC score, which indicates acute malnutrition, which is that threshold we talked about, available to document and talk about all the way up to famine likely, which had been declared in that report. But still, you are not supposed to rely on that primarily for a famine declaration. Put that aside. There's arguments that say, oh, no, but in this Sudan report, they did rely on it, even though this page of the manual specifically says not to rely on it, which I can point you back to. Immaterial, because people have gone through the full data set and said, wait a second here. They didn't even get to 15%. They're lying about the 15%. They used a half data set from July instead of the full data set from July to figure out how to get themselves above their own new 15% threshold for the declaration of famine in Gaza. And if you actually took the wider data set, you wouldn't get there. So again, and by the way, does a 12% MUAC score make me feel good as opposed to a 15% MUAC score? And, and there's been documentation now of this MUAC score had actually been taken in Gaza before October 7th, before the war. And so we actually have pre-existing data of comparing the accuracy and reliability of MUAC versus the height by weight in Gaza. And we already saw the inflated numbers where you had a misimpression of malnutrition in the MUAC that you did not get in the height by weight in Gaza, which I think they already knew. So they already knew that this was a better score for them to inflate potentially, even if they could get accurate readings, which I still question. But again, it's not enough for them to simply say, we've found a pocket of area where we think there's not enough food. They have to get to famine no matter what. And the third piece, and this is the indefensible one, there is no argument I have seen. People can say you can't really prove that we're not right about the 20% households not getting access to food. You're trying to prove a negative. If the UN says that it is not delivering the vast majority of its aid into northern Gaza, you can't even get the convoys there. They all get raided or looted by Hamas. And therefore, they're not on the ground. They're not going door to door to households. How are they supposed to prove the inaccessibility to food? How am I supposed to disprove the inaccessibility? Okay, on the MUAC scores, they're going to cite, who's taking the measurements? The Health Ministry of Gaza, the hospitals, the Hamas people. I can't prove or disprove it. This goes back to how many people died in the war. It's like we're relying on Hamas data. They're relying on Hamas data here. Okay, the mortality rates make no sense even according to Hamas data. You can't even take Hamas's data and say that 200 people a day are dying in Gaza City from malnutrition. You can't even get to this threshold that they want for every 10,000 people across the entire Gaza Strip. On any day, even including battlefield casualties, you can't get there. It's just not happening. If you thought everybody dying in Gaza every day was all from malnutrition, you still can't get there.
Well, by the way, nobody is saying what, and including us in this conversation, what should be obvious. For 20 years, Hamas has ruled the people of Gaza. Hamas continues to claim it rules the people of Gaza and wants to in
Yeah,
the future.
right.
Therefore, Hamas has a responsibility for the welfare of the people of Gaza. And Hamas could solve this problem today
Of
by
course.
saying, you know what? We're laying down our weapons. We're releasing the hostages. We want the people of Gaza to be well off, to be fed, and we want to stop this right now. And we will. No one is asking. No one is saying this. If there's a famine, all the blame is on Israel. And I just want to move forward to also to
Yeah.
this. You
No, but you're
also
so
say,
right. You're so right. Yeah.
you say the famine is the reason for the famine is that the Israelis are pursuing a policy of genocide.
Right.
And then
Right.
you
Of
say,
course.
oh, and by the way, the spokesman for Antonio Guterres, the UN Secretary General, says, yes, that's right. We know that because the International Association of Genocide Scholars, a very prominent and serious organization, they say so. And then Piers Morgan says, like he's studied, this is an eminent organization. It's the most eminent organization on the subject genocide, and they say so, except it's not. Because again, you're not going to know this probably from the New York Times or the BBC or Sky News, certainly not from Al Jazeera. In truth, this organization doesn't conduct research. It doesn't publish a journal. It doesn't publish reports. You don't need to be a scholar to join. Pay $125. You're a member. Activists, anti-Israeli activists, anti-Semites, anti-Zionists join the organization, and then they have a vote. Doesn't matter how many vote. Whoever wants to vote, it's online. And they vote and they say, yeah, we think this is genocide. And so now it's authoritative that this eminent organization thinks that. Now, by the way, you and I know this. People listening to this podcast may, but a lot of people, Deborah Lipstadt is probably the world's preeminent genocide scholar in reality. And give it credit where credit's due on PBS's firing line. She was asked whether genocide is the appropriate term for the situation in Gaza, and she said no. No, that's anti-Semitism. To call it genocide, no, that's very disturbing. It's anti-Semitism. She said that. But I didn't hear Piers Morgan say this. I certainly didn't hear Antonio Gutierrez say this. None of this. This is a phony organization claiming genocide, and genocide by way of famine. And that's the Israelis starving the Gazans because they had apartheid. This is a slander campaign. And by the way, you can explain this absolutely about the measurements and all of that. It's an emotive campaign. The people at Lush or whatever that name of the soap factory in Britain that are putting out posters on their building saying Gazans are starving, they're not going to listen to it. It's all about emotion. The Israelis are not doing the good job they should do. But you don't win on defense. You'd have to win on offense. And you don't reason people out of a position they weren't reasoned into. This is, again, I just go back to this is a slander campaign going back 50 years that has only gotten worse. My question really is, after you accuse the Israelis of racism, genocide, settler colonialism, apartheid, and using famine as a weapon, what else is there now left to accuse the Israelis of? Parking in a loading zone? I mean, I can't think of additional crimes that you can do. John Spencer, I just mentioned this, and I'll turn back to you. And by the way, Lush, stop starving Gaza. That was the sign that Lush put on its stores and factories and online and displayed. John Spencer, who's the executive director of the Urban Warfare Institute at West Point, he said, Israel has delivered more humanitarian aid to Gaza than any military in history and has provided to an enemy population during wartime. And then he gives the figures 94,000 trucks carrying 1.8 million tons of aid. Israel supported hospitals, repaired water pipelines, increased access to clean water, enabled over 36,000 patients to leave Gaza for treatment abroad. But again, this is not what you're seeing in the major media, the left-wing media. It's not what the UN, with all its billions of resources, what Al Jazeera with its Qatari resources. This becomes a very hard argument to win under these circumstances.
Let me throw a couple of statistics
Okay.
out at you, because I think it brings us to where we are here and what this fight's really about and what it will take to win and defeat Hamas, and why this UN Hamas business model we started with is at the core of what the fight is. Right now, with the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation continuing to get U.S. support, continue to distribute aid, and the UN organizations trying to stymie that, trying to sabotage, trying to withhold, whether it's trucks that aren't moving until they get caught not moving, or trucks that are refusing security coordination so they get looted, knowingly that they're going to get looted when they're offered security coordination. Or food that the United States is paying for through a different organization like the World Food Program that refuses to coordinate with and through the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation and would rather it sit on trucks that get looted. The amount of aid that is being distributed in Gaza right now, 70% of it or so is non-UN. 30% of it is UN. That is a complete change in the dynamic. Part of it is because they're holding back. Part of it they're not refusing to coordinate. And part of it's because the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation has surged, and other ally partner organizations that are really credible aid groups that work in all kinds of places, including in Sudan, are coming in to say, how can we help? How else can we do these things? The UN is clearly failing. Of the different aid that continues to go through, this is what's even crazier. So the UN has its 30% of aid distribution in Gaza. Of all of its aid, the UN says 12% of UN trucks reach their destination without being diverted. 100% of Gaza Humanitarian Foundation trucks reach their destinations and deliver directly to civilians. 12%. They will not coordinate with the IDF. They will not accept private security, and they will not deliver through or with the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, which means the South is doing well because that's where GHF has its biggest impact, and the center and the North are doing worse, intentionally by the United Nations. And who is actually the tip of the spear that is refusing all the coordination? The head of one UN agency that we give $5 billion to a year. I mean, we give more to this UN agency than we give in military assistance to the state of Israel. And the food that we are delivering to that person's agency could be used in coordination with the GHF that the United States taxpayer is also funding. Could be coordinated with security to protect our taxpayer-funded investment in food aid. But this person refuses to do that, potentially by order of the UN Secretary General. That person's name is Cindy McCain, and she is the executive director of the World Food Program. And you might have seen she went to Israel last week. And she went to Israel because she has a bit of a PR problem on her hands. Because a whistleblower has come forward to the USAID Inspector General and said, I've been in coordination meetings in Gaza as a food aid worker, and I saw the WFP refuse coordination with Israel to secure the convoys intentionally. And I believe it's being done to save UNRWA at the direction of the Secretary General. And that's now being investigated. So she scurries off to Israel, has great photo ops with the IDF, the Ministry of Defense, Prime Minister, etc. The Prime Minister of Israel puts on X that they had a good conversation and that he asked her to coordinate the World Food Program's aid with and through the GHF and to make sure that there is secure distribution so that more aid gets to the people of Gaza, and that you wrest control of all other aid distribution points in central and northern Gaza from Hamas alongside the military strategy. She has refused. She must go. That is my conclusion. She is now the partner of Hamas in denying the strategy to defeat Hamas. And that means the reason why more hostages aren't coming home and might die. It means the reason why any Palestinians who aren't getting food. And it means where Hamas is still in control of food aid, why Hamas is in control of food aid. With our $5 billion. This is not hard. This is not hard to figure out.
It's really disappointing, too. I mean, Antonio Guterres, he's an old Portuguese socialist. He is one of those on the left, and there are many who are perfectly comfortable with the Islamist and even jihadist agenda for whatever reasons. But Cindy McCain, she's an American. She's the wife of John McCain. She should not allow herself to be a captive of this organization that is just so dreadful. Antonio Gutierrez goes to China for the Shanghai Cooperation Organization summit with Putin and with the president of the Islamic Republic of Iran and Kim Jong-un. We know where he is, why we support him and his organization. I guess we're just letting his term wind down after all this time. And it's just not been something that President Trump has taken particular note of. But the direction he has brought the UN it's been dreadful for a half century, but he's no improvement. But Sidney McCain is just a dreadful, dreadful disappointment, I have to say, as you have said. All right, lots to do. I want to respect your time. Any other points on this really fake famine, fake and slanderous charges of genocide that you can do 300-page reports that absolutely debunk them, but it may not be as powerful as a bumper sticker. And the bumper stickers are what Al Jazeera and what various other groups that are anti-Zionist in the sense that they do want the annihilation of Israel and are either in favor of or indifferent to the extermination of Israelis in this process, which is, I think, what anti-Zionism has come to mean. I'll give you the last word.
I only have two other policy recommendations. One is for our incoming UN ambassador, Mike Waltz, who I think is going to become one of our greatest ambassadors of the United Nations very soon. I'm very excited. He's got a great team he's going to build there. He's got other nominees aside from him. A great friend of ours, Jeff Bartos, the ambassador nominee for management reform. And my God, does the United Nations need both management and reform? And so a couple of things that I would note. One, I talked about how Hamas is not a terrorist organization in the eyes of the United Nations. We should fight to change that. That should be number one Security Council resolution we put forward after the GA or during the GA.
It'll be vetoed by China and Russia.
And I would love to see that.
Yep,
I would love that story told.
You're right.
Because they're a terrorist organization in the European Union. They're a terrorist organization in Canada. They're a terrorist organization in the UK. They're a terrorist organization in most countries that have an actual brain around the world, but not in the United Nations. And if China and Russia want to wield the veto to say we refuse to put Hamas on a sanctions list, we support what they did on October 7th. We support what they do to the hostages. We support them continuing to hold the people of Gaza hostage. Let them do that and let the world see that. That's number one. By the way, let the American people see that. And number two, let's put UNRWA out of business. So the General Assembly may not vote to dismantle them. So the Secretary General won't. You know what? We can. Let's follow Israel's example and designate UNRWA as a terrorist group under our terrorism sanctions. The Treasury Department has that authority in coordination with the Secretary of State. We have all the evidence. We don't have to you'd have to have 5 shows to go through all the evidence just collected since October 7th on Hamas's relationship with UNRWA, the material support they provided. We have them on Executive Order 13224, which is our sanctions authority under terrorism support and finance. Hit them with that, shut them down, start managing their dismantlement in other areas where they do the same thing, and tell the United Nations, and more importantly, tell all their other donors, it's over. You have to work through the coordination that the United States is working to dislodge Hamas and the United Nations business model in Gaza. And that means the World Food Program. If you're going to be on board, great. If you're not, we're going to push you out or pause our funding. Work through the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, expand that model, dislodge Hamas, and give the people of Gaza a future that is de-radicalized, not Hamas-led, and leads, hopefully, very soon, to the return of all the hostages.
Rich, thanks for explaining all this to us today. I'm glad you're on top of these issues. And thanks to all of you who have been with us for this conversation here today on Foreign Podicy.